loading right now. I think this one's going to be our longer one. And then we'll have a little dessert. We'll do our holds and recalls training, and that one is much, much shorter. We'll do that one right afterwards. So this is a requirement of any programs that receive federal funding. And for CFSP, that's you all. So, or CSFP, we have to go through. But I will try to make this as interesting as possible, although I'm going to admit it's a little bit dry. So hang in there with me. If you need me to slow down or have questions, feel free to just pop those in the chat or comments, suggestions, those kinds of things as we go. My team will help me just kind of look at those and come off mute and advocate for them if they see anything that's relevant as we go. So hopefully that makes sense. A quick intro. My name's KK. If we haven't met before, I'm fairly new to my team. I joined in March, the end of March, and I'm a training and compliance specialist. So this is one of the first trainings that I have researched and am able to provide for you all today. And yeah, I'm hoping it takes us about 45 minutes to get through. So without anything else, we're just going to kind of dive in. Can everybody see the agenda page? Did that work out when I just changed it there? Okay, awesome. So really, this is what we're going to go through today. We're going to look at civil rights legal authorities, and that part is going to go very quickly. And then we're going to dive into areas of compliance and assurances, and you can see all of the topics we're going to cover there that have to do with civil rights. But first, we've got our attendance. And again, this is important because it is a requirement for every site. So if you could please, in the chat, just type who on your site, because I can see that there's a group where multiple people are watching. That happens at a lot of our locations. If you can just put everybody's name and the site that you all represent into the chat, that way you can be counted for attendance. And then we'll just download our chat at the end of this so that we know who is already set and who from our list still needs to complete this training with me. Thank you for doing that. I'll give you just a second for those to be typed up and sent. Okay. And I'm going to keep us moving here. Time to go to our legal authorities. So as it says here, these are our acts, amendments, federal regulations, policy memos, those kinds of things that come out that determine why we need to go through civil rights as a training, why that is a requirement of federally funded programs. So the first foremost one is Title VI. And as you can see there, it states no person in the United States on the ground of race, color, or national origin will be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And the rest get more detailed from there. I will be sending the slides out after this training. So if you want to come back to any of these, feel free. But for today's purposes, we're going to move fairly quickly through them. I'm going to note them, but we're going to go at a fairly quick pace. Before I show you more of those, though, let's make a definition for discrimination together. So as you can see there, it's any kind of different treatment, which makes any distinct group or person either by intentionally like neglecting or actions or lack of actions that negatively affect a protected class. So those are protected classes listed there. So, you know, we've all probably heard of an example of discrimination before, but for our purposes today, this is the specific definition. All right, so some more of those legal authorities, right? So as you can see there, we have the Civil Rights Restoration Act. Title IX is probably one that we're very familiar with. Age discrimination, which is going to matter in our CFSP programs. Equal opportunity for religious organizations, you can kind of see there at the bottom. And that makes it possible for some of our sites that are churches to be able to participate in these programs, but also to protect participants from having to participate in the religious activities if an organization is a church. so that they can still be of service to their community, but individuals also still have freedom of religion. Here's another slide of them. We have a lot. Let's see if there's anything on this one I wanted to point out to you. You can kind of see midway down, services for persons with limited English proficiency. We're going to be talking about that a little bit more in depth soon in these slides. And that there's some more recent ones. One is in 2021 and one is in 2025. So there have been some more recent adjustments, which are reflected in these slides. And then our final slide of these, more legal authorities. Again, feel free to come back to these if you're curious at all as to why we do our civil rights training. Okay, so the very first requirement to receive federal funding when it comes to civil rights is you have to participate in an annual training. And this is where it's going to get a little bit meta because we're in the training now, but we're also going to be talking about what needs to happen in a training. So as you can see here, state agencies, and that's me and my department, are responsible for training you all, our subrecipient agencies, on an annual basis. So every year you're going to hear from me, and by the end, we're going to be able to chant this whole training in unison because we'll have it memorized. But for now, you also need to note that you're responsible for training local sites. So anybody else that you subcontract with, especially frontline staff. So that's going to be anybody who interacts with our participants, folks who receive food on an annual basis. So that is probably not necessarily going to be your financial officers because they probably are not interacting with those individuals. But if you've got any staff who are passing out food or certainly are certifying clerks, individuals who check if people are eligible, those individuals definitely need to go through this training because it's all about our interactions with people and making sure that we don't discriminate during those interactions. This is also going to apply, as you can see in that bottom bullet point, to volunteers. So that's something to keep in mind. And the third bullet there is a reminder, new employees need to receive this training before interacting with participants. And that is to protect them as much as you and our participants from any discrimination or any intentional or unintentional or any claims of discrimination. We would want people to know this info before they start interacting with the public, which just makes sense. And that takes us to our first checkpoint, which is, how is your site tracking training compliance? And you might want to consider too, are there any volunteers or staff that haven't gone through this that I need to have go through it? For anybody that's not frontline staff that's covering this training today with us, it might just be sufficient for them to watch this recording. So that could be something that you do is send it out to your folks that need to be going through it. And you'll want to be tracking their attendance. That's what we're talking about here. We need to know who has gone through it and how they've gone through it on an annual basis. So maybe you're the right person for that, or maybe you need to talk to a director or supervisor or something like that. But this is a good point for you to jot that down, something we need to be doing, and to pass that on to the right person. Okay, so I'm going to take us to our next slide. As you can see there are our training topics. These are all of the things that sites are required to do under the civil rights banner if they receive federal funding. And so we just talked about the second one there, civil rights training. And these are the rest of the assurances that we're going to spend our time deep diving on. But when people are trained on civil rights, they also need to be aware of all of these things, which is why it's listed here right now. So I'm going to take us into our third bullet point there, which is public notification. And this is just basically, how do we let people know that they can come and get food from us? And when can they do that, right? So a little bit more text to explain that very thing. We have to notify the public of availability. And that's not just our typical operating hours, but any closures. Some of the locations that I've been to do management evaluations, which I'll be doing rounds to get to meet you all soon and see some of your programs, maybe not this year, but hopefully within the next two, cycle through and get to meet everybody and see everybody. Anyway, on some of these visits, people have been passing out calendars, paper calendars. So that's one way to do this, to notify about program availability and closures. But some of our locations also have websites and some have both. And I would highly recommend both. But if you have a website or even a Facebook page that you're regularly updating with program availability, then you are meeting the requirement of public notification, at least partly. There's a couple pieces to it. As you can see there in my second bullet point, rights and responsibilities. So this is going to be showing up on some of your paperwork, and we'll get into that a little bit more in depth. But basically that we have the responsibility as folks that run these programs not to discriminate, and that they have responsibilities as well, like notifying us if there's a change in household size or something that might affect their eligibility. We also have a policy of non-discrimination, and statements about that should show up on like our website or in printed materials, maybe our applications, and likely you already have that on all of your stuff, which is great. And then finally, they need to be notified of how do they file a complaint. And so long as you have your Justice for All and Justice for All poster up, you'll notice on that, if you've ever read the fine print, which I've had to do for this job, but maybe it's by your water cooler and you got bored one day and so you did read the fine print, but you're going to see on there that it explains if they want to make a complaint, they feel they've been discriminated against, how they go through that process. So make sure that your Justice for All poster is prominently displayed, and that means out in the public where your participants that are coming to pick up food can see it easily. So that might need to be on a countertop. Think about distance and eyesight and those kinds of things, right? And that's something that I do check when I come for my management evaluation. So if you need to move your poster, but let's just make sure it's in the right spot. Great. I think I've pretty much covered this slide. The only additional point, and it's not a requirement, it's just a suggestion, is that all of your photos and graphics that are used to inform about the program, consider making those applicable to the participants. That's more widely reflective of the people that you are serving. Okay, on to accessibility. So when it comes to notifying the public, we also need to be considering folks with disabilities and making some reasonable modifications. While we're going to go into that in depth, as it applies here, you'll just want to consider, do we have options for folks with limited English proficiency? Like, are our materials able to be provided in Spanish if need be, right? And then folks with disabilities, do we have a Braille copy? Could we make sure that the font is really large and that there's high contrast between the page that it's on and the font color that we've chosen, so that folks with various levels of, sight capacity are able to tell what our materials are saying to them? Something that you're going to want to consider. And we've already talked slightly about this Justice for All poster and how it needs to be displayed. There it's listed AD 475A. That's the most recent version, and that's the correct one for CSFP programs to have. I'm seeing that typo there. Do you guys see that? If somebody wants to pop that in the chat, that would help me. I need to make it say CSFP, not CFSP, on this slide. Yeah, for ordering them. FNS currently doesn't have them available for order, but the PDF is available on the website, and printing instructions to have it the right size are also listed there. So if you don't have the right copy or you want to double check that you do, I'm not able to order them because FNS doesn't have them available right now, but you would be able to print them. So that's good at least. And that does take us to kind of a quick question, a check-in about this poster, right? So this is a hypothetical. If, for example, I came to do one of the management evaluations and you had your Justice for All poster up, excellent. It is in the managerial office. Is that a civil rights violation? You could come off mute or pop it in the chat if you know the answer. Yes, excellent. Thank you guys for weighing in and participating. I really appreciate that. It is. And it's something I have to note down. Although honestly, when I come for the management visit, if I see it in the wrong space, I'm going to say, let's move this. We'll be able to resolve it right away. But that's not going to happen because you all are up on your training and it's going to be resolved before I even get there. Now, when I did open the chat to see your responses, I also saw your question there, Deborah, about is the poster available in Spanish? And I do believe so. With most of the materials I'm talking about today on the FNS website, they have them available in multiple languages. So I would say likely, yeah, it's listed there. Although I'm not 100% sure, I'm like 90% sure. So yeah, say it probably is. Another material that's going to be available in multiple languages and that we need to have prominently shared on our materials on a website, if we have that, right, is our non-discrimination statement. So consider, your application form, your notice of eligibility and ineligibility. And I've seen this most of the time when I go. If you're using the form that we put together and that our department shares, it has that on there already. Notification of adverse action if they did feel they were discriminated against, how they could file a claim about that. I covered that. Yep. And like I said, it's available in 50 plus languages on the FNS Civil Rights website. So that's what you would look up. Here's an example of the statement. I'm sorry, that's kind of small. This is the lengthy version for sure. There is a shortened version that's also available on the website. But this is the full enchilada listed here. Okay, so it's time for our second checkpoint. We've just covered public notification and how we need to be notifying. So take a second to consider, is my location totally compliant? If somebody were to file a complaint, would they know how to do that? Are we appropriately notifying updates of our availability? Do we have those statements of equal access and non-discrimination available on all those spots KK just listed? If not, let's write down a next step. What do we need to do? What do we need to fix? Who do we need to chat to? Okay. Give just one more second here. Oh, thank you, Glade. I see that note there. It is available. Thank you for checking. Okay, so let's go into disability access. And as you can see there, it's based on the ADA Amendment of 2008. So they've got a definition for us. I do find this really interesting. So I think it's important for us to note because we probably have one or two images of what it means to be disabled in our minds. But it's defined here as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Or they've had like a history of that, which is a pretty wide definition. That could apply to taking care of ourselves, performing manual tasks like walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, another type of disability that we often forget about, working disabilities. So keep all of that in mind, right? And it could affect different parts of the bodies, the immune system, normal cell growth, right? All of our different systems, digestive, neurological, respiratory, circulatory, cardiovascular, reproductive. So that's a pretty broad definition. And we want to be prepared to support any individuals that do have a disability, but let's talk about the limits of that, right? So we want equal access. So our CFSP programs need to include some auxiliary aids and services. We'll talk a little bit more about what that specifically looks like. But yeah, considering hearing, visual, speech disabilities, effective communication. So here's some reasonable modifications, right? We talked about website and digital services if you have visual impairments. So maybe that's the next step that we need to write down. Obviously, thinking about our buildings. Do we have physical access for individuals that are wheelchair bound or that have other mobility aids, walkers? We probably do, right, with the populations that we're serving, but it's something to consider. Are there parts of your building they can't access? Do we need to be looking for grant funds for elevators? Those kinds of things. And then auxiliary aids and services. Do we need any sign language interpreters? Larger print copies of things? Braille audio tapes? Hopefully that inspires and jogs your thinking process about this. Okay, we have a quick question here, another hypothetical. So if we had a person who was wheelchair bound that wants to come to our site, but the local bus, or maybe you don't even have a local bus, right, doesn't access them. Let's say we're here in Missoula, like I am. So we do have a good bus system, but wherever they're located, they're not dropped off close enough to our site. What are some things that we could try to do to help accommodate this individual? Right? Like if our building has a ramp, great. We're compliant with civil rights. We've made it easily accessible enough. But this is us wanting to go the extra mile to support our participants. Any thoughts, any ideas? What could we do? Feel free to pop off mute or just type it in the chat. That's a good one. Yes. Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, Debbie's thinking the same thing. Home delivery. Excellent. I've seen plenty of that on my visits so far, my management evaluation visits. Yeah, we can totally set up a home delivery for them. Probably, right? Ideally, we can figure out a way to do that. And if your site doesn't currently offer that, I would say this is a great group and a great resource to talk through solutions of how could we possibly organize it and set it up so that we can be doing home deliveries. Cool. Some other ideas that I've had around that is calling the bus and seeing if they can make an accommodation, working with other individuals that can do transportation. I've definitely paired volunteers with individuals, clients who needed some extra transportation or support with transportation, who were willing to do that, wanted to give back to their community. So putting out a call for a volunteer to do that. Maybe we have a volunteer in our organization who has a wheelchair accessible vehicle that would be willing to do that. Okay. All right. I'm going to keep us moving here. I know the pace is fast, but we have a lot of ground to cover. So, like I said, now it's time for us to cover the language access. So, LEP is the acronym that this training typically uses to describe individuals who, like, are maybe learning English or for whatever reason have limited English proficiency. Maybe it's not their first language, or maybe they have a learning disability or a communication disability, right? There you go. Okay, so we want meaningful access. That's kind of the buzzword around LEP, right? And so what that looks like is individuals are able to still participate in our program, even if they're LEP and it doesn't cost them anything personally, like time or accuracy or comfort, right? So there's some bullets listed here that we should be doing. We should translate any of our vital documents. That's our like application, as well as look at our online information for individuals. We should have multiple languages available if possible. And then post multilingual notices for free interpretation services. As a federally funded program, you may or may not know this. I used to be in a different program and didn't know until I went through a civil rights training that you're required to be prepared to offer interpretation services to individuals that have limited English proficiency so they can still participate in your program. So you might want to look into some translation services. And one that I can recommend is Language Link. That's what I ended up using in my last position. The way that works is if you did have an individual come in, you'd have that posted multilingual notice and they'd be able to point to the language that they use. The form says we have translation services available in this language in all of the languages. And then you call the number. In this case, it was Language Link, but there's lots of services that are offered like this. And you say, yep, I need translation for a client that's here with me, and the client can say what language they need their translation in to the person. They're going to get an interpreter on the line for you, and then you're able to have a live conversation. You talk just to the individual like you would normally, but the interpreter is speaking in between to translate what's being said. So usually subscription to those services aren't too expensive, But and usually the situations that we need those are rare. But you definitely want to be prepared for them before they happen, because again, otherwise you are at risk of a discrimination case, right? Because we need to have this equal access for everybody. So that might be something to look into. Other options, though, are utilizing contracted interpreters. If you just know, like here in Missoula, we have a high population of individuals that are refugees from Somali. So we know we might need some of those languages that are spoken in that area ready to go. And actually, there are individuals here in Missoula already that can be contracted to do this service for us. So that can be an option for your location potentially. Or just and make sure that this last bullet point that you train your frontline staff, individuals who are going to be interacting with these folks, how to help them reach these services if need be. Again, they're rare, but your volunteer is going to really appreciate it if they know, either going through this training or specifically once you have some version of this set up, what they should do in those situations. Other suggestions that my team has talked about too can even just be Google Translate. It is definitely not perfect, but it can be a helpful start while you get things set up if you need a solution tomorrow, for example. Let's see here. What else do I have on the slide? Okay, 2 things to note. Participants cannot be asked to bring their own interpreters because that would not be meaningful access. That would be putting the responsibility on them when it is our responsibility, since we are federally funded, to make sure that they can participate equally. And then similarly, children cannot be expected to serve as interpreters. My previous position I mentioned, that happened way too often. And it's just not fair to the kiddos. It's just not fair to the families. It seems convenient, but really we need to take the responsibility off of those children and do the translation services for them. If you're curious what language you need to prepare for, there are some assessments that you can look at. There's a couple links there, like census data and community surveys, which state like the typical racial and ethnic makeup of a community, the languages spoken in that area, which is something that can kind of help you prepare adequately in these situations. And considering like frequency of coming into contact with these individuals. Okay, great. So that takes us to our first quick question in the limited English proficiency section. And that's, how could we help a participant who's trying to speak with a volunteer in their primary language if our volunteer only understands English? So a little bit of a learning check here. Cost will be an issue. Got it. Thank you for noting that, Susan. Yeah, I think the subscription services for like Language Link, at least when I had that set up in my last position, was about $50 a month. So that's definitely something to maybe like bake into your next budget or something, right? If that's the route that you want to go. But back to our quick question. Yeah, how could we help a participant who's trying to speak with a volunteer? What are some things that you could do at your site or that you already do at your site? Okay. Thank you, Stephanie, for weighing in. They use Google Translate most of the time. Thank you, Jackie. Yes, utilize a staff member who speaks the language or use Google Translate. Absolutely. Excellent. If you have a staff member, that's great. Awesome. Yeah, I've had success with Google Translate as well. It doesn't have to be perfect, but making an effort is required, and it's a good in between as well. Okay, excellent. We're going to keep going. Oh, nice. Thank you, Glade, for weighing in as well. Montana Language Services, located in Bozeman, can provide live over, probably translation services, right? So if you call, they can do some of that locally. Wow, that's fantastic. I didn't even know that. Okay. Over the phone interpreter services. Got it. Okay, excellent. Awesome. So that's LEP, right? And just like for your fortitude and how long we're going, I'm on slide 30 of 46. So that's where we're at with progress, which is great. But hang in there. Next, we're going to go into race and ethnicity data collection requirements. So as you probably already know, to determine how effectively FNS programs are reaching eligible persons in a community, like if it's all white individuals, we are not effectively serving our communities, right? And that's why we monitor race and ethnicity. So it's part of civil rights to make sure that it's not a discrimination. We have to collect that information. Like I said, like you're probably already aware. So likely this is already part of an application. It might be part of conversations when you're determining eligibility and working with your individuals, but letting them know we get this information just to make sure that we're in compliance with federal regulations and that there isn't discrimination occurring. It does not affect your eligibility at all, is a good message to convey if it's a concern for anybody. We don't survey children. Let's see. Oh yeah, making sure that this information, when we do collect it, is kept confidentially. Oh yeah, and then letting our applicants know that there's only one category for ethnicity, but they can choose as many in the race category as they would like to. And I'm going to show you an example of that on the next form. You probably all are already using this, but Form FNS 191, I think we do send that out just to record and submit their information. And if this is outdated or not like true to your experience, that's probably just because I'm new in my position. So I'm sorry if that's not what you're actually doing or it seems confusing. Feel free to type in the chat if that's the case. I would love to know. I did run this by my team, but just had that thought. Maybe you have a different form you're using. And like I said, here's the example. You can kind of see that 2-question format. So ethnicity is just that really simplified one or the other option. Race has many more options that you can include, and they can select several if they're biracial or multiracial. All right. So for our third checkpoint here, is my site compliant with race and an ethnicity data collection? Likely, because we do some regular reports on that, but just something good to check. And then write down a next step if that is not the case, or if you're not sure about that, you might want to check with a supervisor or the right individual about that. Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Jackie, for weighing in. I really, really appreciate the participation. Much better than just talking into the void. Okay, we're now on slide 36 of 46, so making good headway. And we are pretty much done with the different areas we need to consider. This is something that is incredibly rare, but that you all should be prepared for, which is if we did get a discrimination complaint, what would happen, right? So obviously we're notifying individuals that they can file a complaint if they need to. That's like a line on the poster. It should be a line on the application. You might want a complaint form. It's not necessary. If you did have one, it would include this information, right? So, or, if we don't have one, this is still the information that we collect, right? So what is their name? What is their address and their telephone number? What office or organization did this happen in? What is the date or dates of the alleged discrimination? So an example could be, I think that I'm not getting my full box of food because I'm a woman and the person that's delivering my food just doesn't like women, right? That would be a protected class. That would be a situation of discrimination. And so maybe the first time it happened was July 1st, but we weren't sure about it. It could have just been a mistake. But then, oh my gosh, it happened again in the beginning of August. So there's a couple dates that we're keeping track of, right? And then we were certain that this was a discrimination issue because we talked about it. We asked for our box to be brought, and it happened again in September, right? So that's just an example of why we'd have multiple dates of the alleged discrimination. And then the basis, right? I think that it's because I'm female and it seems like my deliverer has an issue with women, or any number of those protected classes, right, could apply in this situation. And the basis is I'm allotted all this and I have been missing this item every single time, or several items every single time, or something like that. The nature of the incident, similar. And then any witnesses, right? Is there anybody that works at the location, or has anybody else had this kind of issue? Another participant that I've talked to, something like that. Titles, businesses, if it's a organization owner, somebody that works at your program. And oh yeah, okay, so that's the information that you would collect for a complaint. And there is a form, pre-made form on the FNS website, again, available in over 50 languages. Something to note, this is already listed everywhere, but for you to keep in mind, alleged discrimination has to be reported within 180 days of that first instance, or there's nothing we can do with it. It can't be included in a report. It can't be followed up on. They suggest keeping a log of civil rights complaints. They're so rare because you all do a great job that I would say, that notebook's just going to get forgotten about, or that document's going to get lost and forgotten about by the time you run into another one of these. So that's the suggestion, and I'll leave it at that. And then the last piece to note really clearly is that confidentiality is extremely important. So individuals need to feel free and protected to make these complaints if they need to, without fear of retaliation. And so only folks that need to know. And very importantly, which we'll talk about, they cannot be treated differently if a complaint is filed. Okay, so like it says here, an individual could send us an email, strongly worded email, probably with their complaint. We need to follow up if they don't include any of that information, or if we can't get any of that information. So if there's maybe witnesses, but they don't mention that because they're not thinking about it, but we know that's part of a complaint, we follow back up with them and we ask for a list of witnesses. Or they might just verbally tell us about this. This might be a complaint that we're fielding in our office. It's just important to, in those instances, again, protect their anonymity as we take down as we write down for them their complaint. Or it might be anonymous. So you might have a box for suggestions or complaints, right? I've seen that at one of the sites I've been to, and maybe you're getting a submission in there that is actually a discrimination claim, right? So in those situations, we just accept whatever form they come in, and we forward them, like it says here, to the FNS office or Office of the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights. Specific info for that is also on the FNS Civil Rights website, and specifically within 5 calendar days of receipt. So checking regularly for those kinds of complaints and handling that in a timely manner is our responsibility if we receive federal funding. Okay. So when it comes to handling these complaints, as well as trying to maybe head them off at the pass, we're going to cover conflict resolution just really, really briefly here. I could probably do a whole training just on conflict resolution and customer service, but we don't have time for that today. So here's the super condensed version, right? So every client that we have, we should be treating them with respect. It's obvious, but it needs to be stated. And maybe you have a volunteer who's got a little bit of a rougher rapport and maybe likes to joke around. Consider that we don't want to have any claims of discrimination. So it's really important that we're treating everyone with respect, mutual respect, equal respect, right? So the second bullet point, everybody should be treated equally, especially no matter those protected classes, race, color, national origin, sex, disability, age. And as I say those, different images of people pop into my mind, right? And it's important that we just take a second to consider, ask ourselves, am I treating this person in the same manner I treat other people, right? Just because someone is, let's do an example here, has a different national origin. Maybe they're not from Montana, they're not from the United States, they have limited English proficiency for the case of this example, right? Are we treating them the same way we treat other people? Are we happy to see them, welcoming them into the space? Or are we letting our anxiety about handling that situation and making sure they have equal access leach into the way we're interacting with them, right? Is that making us less happy to see them, less kind and respectful in our interactions? Just things to consider. Same with disabilities. Are we giving equal time and access to individuals with visible and invisible disabilities? So consider in your interactions with all of the clients that we serve, are we treating them the same way we treat everybody else? And it's very important that we are patient, calm, polite, fair in our dealings with all of our folks, empathetic to their situation, what they might be going through, their feelings. I like to point out at this point that even if you don't agree with somebody's feelings, there's no harm in validating them. So we might have a client come in that's just so angry that they are no longer receiving their food, even though we sent out so many notices that their eligibility needed to be redone and that we were coming up on that deadline, and they still didn't give us what they needed to. And somehow this is our problem, right? We still can say, you're angry. And that helps a lot for an angry person. You know what doesn't help is telling them to calm down. That usually is just fuel on a fire, right? So you don't have to agree to validate by reflecting back their emotion. You're upset. I can see that you're upset. I'm sorry that you're upset. I can see that you're angry. Doesn't have to say that it's okay that they're angry or that it's logical or makes sense. And then finally, being compassionate. We don't know what anybody's going through on any given day. We have all been through a big life event, so we know that could be going on for anybody that's walking through our doors on any given day. And keeping that in mind and giving benefit of the doubt is always the best policy in these situations. And typically, if we have this kind of approach, we'll reduce the instances where people feel that they're being discriminated against, and we'll have a smoother operating office. So just keeping in mind, all of our participants have varied needs, whether that is maybe today they need extra compassion because they're really fired up, or they just need me to validate their feelings, all the way through to maybe they need an auxiliary aid or, a Braille version of this or a large print version of this, something like that. As I already stated, if somebody does file a complaint, we never retaliate. Again, only people that need to know that somebody has filed a complaint will need to know about that. Otherwise, we protect their anonymity and we interact with them in the same way we would. So that's going to be a self-reflection moment where you need to consider, am I nervous around this person, or am I avoiding this person, or am I trying to get them out of the program in other ways because I know they filed a complaint? Or am I talking about them behind their back because they filed a complaint? Those would all be areas where you need to do some self-reflection, and maybe you're discriminating against this individual and need to adjust your conduct so it's more equal. Okay, and then this last one, I just cannot recommend enough. I did see this at the last management evaluation I went to, and I was so happy to see it on the wall. But if you already have this, great. If not, I highly recommend just writing up a simple couple of steps policy. There might even already be one on the FNS website. It seemed like the location I was at, they had pulled it from federal materials already. But to put together a little policy of like, we expect fair treatment back. And if, this is we have, this is a federally funded site. So, individuals coming in and interacting with us cannot be belligerent. They can't be violent, and if you are, we will ask you to leave the location, and if need be, get more support involved in the situation. Something like that. That's clear. We don't put up with swearing or voices raised or physical violence or threats, that kind of thing. A policy like that, just put up on the wall that makes it clear, like, this is a place of mutual respect, and this is what's going to happen if you do speak like that. We're going to ask you to leave and come back at another time, or hold for a while and get a manager or further support involved. That kind of expectation setting can avoid a lot of situations happening. And so at the last site I was at, that was posted in several locations where the public would be, that those kinds of interactions, they expected mutual respect. And I think that is a great conflict resolution technique. Okay. Fourth checkpoint. Is this our final one? It's our final one. We can celebrate that. So, is your location ready to handle complaints, however unlikely? Do you have logs? Everybody trained, right? Things that we've covered. Are participants notified of their rights to file a complaint if need be? I think this is probably all likely yeses, but something for you to note down if there's next steps that you need to deal with. Oh, okay. Susan, I see your message. An example, we have had this, but I'm not totally certain what that was for because I was deep in chatting at you all. Oh, an HR representative. Nice. That's very helpful in those situations. Yeah, to get them involved. The policy on behavior. Oh, okay, got it. An example. So we have had this. So yeah, like on behavior, what is expected out of our participants, I'm guessing. Are you saying that you have a poster. Okay, got it. Okay. Yeah, definitely. I'll look at the chat after this and see if I can't find an example of what they had posted up so that you all could copy that, adjust it for your site and put it up. Save you some work. That's great. Okay. So, last section? Last section. Use a poster. Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, I'll see if I can't get a poster of that for you. Compliance reviews. So this is our very last section. And there's a couple different kinds of compliance reviews that you might run into. So we're going to chat about those real briefly. One that you've probably already been through, maybe didn't even know that's what we were calling it. It was a pre-award review. These have to be done by us when we're starting a contract with a new location and submitted to FNS, our parent department, before we can like get up and running. And they're often desk reviews, so we typically can cover all this stuff just over email and send paperwork back and forth. But the one I keep talking about where I'm visiting locations and doing a management evaluation, these are our routine reviews. These have to be done annually, or at least, like I said, on a rotating basis. So hopefully I can see everybody within like a fiscal annual year. Anyway, so you probably know if I've already reached out to you that I've scheduled a visit, and I have a very like packed like through October, which is really nice to come and visit as many of you as I can for one of these. What's listed here are some of the review questions that we'll go through when I'm there. And that typically just looks like a big checklist that we fill out together. And we look at your client files and make sure that, you know, the applications have civil rights stuff on them. Of course, this is applying just to the civil rights aspect of it, but in the actual visits, we cover a broader spectrum of things, which but yeah, some questions here, of course, that we cover. Do your printed materials and websites have the non-discrimination statement? Are you taking reasonable steps to ensure meaningful access for LEP folks? How are folks advised of their rights to file a complaint of discrimination? And do we have reasonable modifications for folks with disabilities? So those are some of the kinds of things during routine reviews that we cover. And the last slide here, special reviews. These rarely occur. They are not carried out by the state agency. They're carried out by FNS, USDA. Those folks will come and carry these out in the rare instances that they occur. They might happen if there's like a specific discrimination complaint that feels high level that they need to get into and come visit personally to go through. Or if there's like a history of statistical underrepresentation of a group, technically one of these could be scheduled for that, or a pattern of complaints, right? But again, very rare, but that is the third and last kind of review that could occur. And then if there are findings during one of these visits, during one of these reviews, here's how we resolve any non-compliance findings. So anything that's required by law but not being adhered to, we have to immediately take steps towards rectifying. So we'll send a letter at the end of one of these, and you'll know as well, like during at least the reviews that I'm a part of and the routine ones that happen on a regular annual basis. We'll talk through any findings, anything we can resolve while we're there, great. Anything that's going to take a little bit longer that needs to be adjusted, processes or things like that, that'll be marked as a finding in our official letter, and then we'll just follow up to close that finding eventually if you can provide documentation that something has been adjusted. Um, you can see here, like it's almost like a individual's performance improvement plan, but it would be for a federal or a civil rights violation. We'd have a voluntary resolution agreement, and that would be a contract that we both sign that says, yep, we're going to work on those findings and dealing with those, and have a timeline included. Yeah, but really, I want you all to know that when I come do those management evaluation visits, we are on the same team. We have the same goal, which is serving our communities this food and this food access. And I am looking to make sure that we can be federally compliant and we can say, yep, we're running this program like you say that we need to be running it. But for the most part, I want you all to be successful, which is why we try to get these trainings done in advance. It's why when we schedule these, we send a request for documents in advance, see if we can get it taken care of before we get there. It's why as we go through it, we resolve those issues together whenever possible. And it's, yeah, just something I'm really looking forward to be able to visit everybody and go through the rest of our requirements together too, and make sure we're trained and compliant. So there's my info. If we haven't already emailed, which we probably have, just in case you need it again. Like I said, we're going to send the slides for this training out. And don't feel too happy that we're done just yet, because we do have, like I said, that other quick training on holds and recalls as our dessert now that we've had our entree to go through after this too. Okay, good to know. Thank you, Stephanie, for weighing in that policy example would be helpful for your site too. Okay, so any questions? I suppose you probably would have already popped them in on this training at all now before we move on to the next one. When was the poster updated? The and Justice for All poster. Great question, Kathy. I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I will look into that and I'll follow back up with you all with that information. Yes, of course. Yes. Thank you for thinking about that. Not totally sure when the poster was updated, but I'll follow back up with the answer. Okay, I think that's probably all the questions. So I'm going to stop sharing this presentation.